Yeah, on a lighter note, right? Let's move on to your tip of the week, basically. And end users someday, whether they know it or like it or not, will probably be having a relationship with artificial intelligence. But MSPs have relationships today with vendors, all sorts of them, and that has something to do with your tip of the week.
You're right on target, Rich, as always. And, we talk a lot about vendors and vendor relationships and, vendor sprawl and technology sprawl and platform sprawl. But, you know, today's tip of the week is all about how to make the most of the vendor relationships that we currently have. And I'll bet, Rich, as I kind of go through kind of three areas here, that it'll cause a lot of our listeners to think about things that they could be doing a little bit differently or looking at the relationship in a different way to understand how they can elicit more love and benefits and strengthen those relationships with their vendors. So let me just kick it off by saying number one, are you participating fully in your strategic vendors partner programs? I talk to a lot of MSPs, Rich, and I find that as I ask questions about, are they leveraging this feature or this benefit from some of the vendor programs that I am familiar with, a lot of the time they're like, no, I'm not even leveraging that. The easy ones are like MDF or training programs or certification opportunities, and co-marketing discounts. Like, how are they leveraging this? We talked a few shows ago, Rich, about thinking about some of these vendor programs being almost like loyalty programs, right? So understand what is in your vendors loyalty programs for you and identify areas where you are not taking full advantage of it. So that's number one. Well, how do you find out about these things? That's tip kind of number two here is scheduling regular check-ins with your vendor. So how do you become that go-to partner, Rich? Thinking, to yourself, that allows vendors to think of you, be top of mind when things like potential leads come over and they want their channel only, so they're going to distribute those leads to their partners. How do you position yourself and become visible as that go-to partner that allows vendors to build a great relationship, you with them, they with you, so that you get some of that along with other benefits, So these are regular check-ins. Can we schedule? Maybe it's not a monthly check-in. Maybe with some of your really critical vendor relationships, you might have a 30-minute monthly check-in, Rich, but maybe it's a quarterly kind of motion or every couple of months. But just make it consistent so that you can, identify mutual opportunities for growth, maybe develop mutual goals together, and maybe some measuring performance on both sides, being candid about what you'd like to see or the other way around. And some of these conversations ultimately lead to positions inside of advisory programs or councils and things like that that vendors really value, right, Rich? Now the third one's a little bit different. It's remaining vendor agnostic when necessary. So what I mean by that is sometimes, and we've had this conversation on the show before too, Rich, there's this conversation that says, well, should I always go with a custom built stack of solutions with multiple vendors because I want best of breed stuff and I don't want to over rely on one vendor for multiple things, kind of that single point of failure concept. I think that there's room in today's modern MSP stack for a little bit of both, right? You need to make sure that you don't have too many of your eggs in one basket, but you also want to have the solutions that some of your clients need and require that may be more costly, that you may have to source from specialists in those particular categories of solution, if that makes sense, Rich. So, just kind of thinking about how we're going to improve uh, our organization's growth, and increase efficiencies and maybe reduce some of the noise and sprawl. These are kind of three areas that I thought would be helpful for our listeners to think about as they begin strat planning for 2025.